When you've been married for 25 years, you think you know everything about your partner, their quirks, their dreams, even their secrets. Lydia was my constant, my everything, the woman who made me believe in forever. And yet, looking back now, I realize how little I truly understood her. Or perhaps, how much I refused to see. Lydia was captivating in every sense of the word. Her beauty was timeless, like a sculpture that defied age. Strangers noticed her before they noticed me when we were together, and honestly, I didn't mind. She deserved the attention, and I felt lucky just being by her side. But it wasn't just her looks, it was her intellect, her ambition, and the way she could make anyone feel like they were the only person in the room. We built a life that most people envied. A spacious home in a quiet, leafy neighborhood. Vacations in Europe every other summer. Weekend getaways to the coast. Together, we raised 2 kids who had grown into independent young adults, leaving us with an empty nest that, at first, felt like a new chapter of freedom. But over the years, I'd noticed a shift in Lydia. Her love for finer things, once a playful indulgence, began to feel more like an obsession. Luxury wasn't just a treat anymore, it was a requirement. And then there was Graham Whitmore, her boss. He wasn't the type of man you ignored. He had the charm of a politician, the ruthlessness of a Wall Street broker, and a net worth to match. Graham carried himself with the kind of confidence only money can buy, and he had a reputation for taking what he wanted, no matter who it belonged to. I never liked him, not from the moment I first met him at one of Lydia's company events. He was older, graying at the temples, and impeccably dressed in tailored suits that probably cost more than my car. But it wasn't his appearance that bothered me, it was the way he looked at Lydia. His gaze lingered too long, his compliments were too personal, and the way he laughed at her jokes felt calculated. It wasn't admiration, it was hunger. And Lydia, as always, brushed off my concerns. "Don't be ridiculous," she'd say with an exasperated sigh. "He's my boss, and he's harmless. You're overthinking it." Overthinking it. Maybe I was. After all, Lydia had always been faithful, and I had no reason to doubt her. So I buried the discomfort and reminded myself that our marriage was stronger than any fleeting glance from a man like Graham. But no matter how hard I tried to shake it, the unease clung to me, a shadow that refused to be ignored. The first sign that something wasn't right came on a Thursday night. Lydia was late coming home, later than usual. Her work schedule had become increasingly demanding in the past year, and she often stayed late at the office or traveled for urgent business trips. When she finally walked through the door that evening, she was glowing in a way that didn't feel like relief from a long day. It was a different kind of energy, something almost giddy. "Big day at the office?" I asked, setting down the book I'd been pretending to read. "You could say that," she replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She poured herself a glass of wine and joined me on the couch, but her attention was elsewhere. Her phone buzzed every few minutes, and she kept glancing at it, her thumb hovering over the screen like she was deciding whether to reply. "Work never ends, huh?" I said, trying to keep my tone light. "It's just Graham," she said offhandedly, her fingers flying across the screen. "He wanted to make sure the presentation for tomorrow is finalized." I nodded, pretending to accept her explanation, but something about her demeanor set my nerves on edge. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was like she was present in body only. Her mind, her emotions, her focus, they were somewhere else entirely. Over the next few weeks, the changes in Lydia became harder to ignore. She was more guarded, especially with her phone. Where she used to leave it lying on the kitchen counter or the nightstand, now it was always within arm's reach, face down. She started working out more, buying new clothes, and taking longer to get ready in the mornings. When I commented on it, she laughed and said, "I just want to feel good about myself." Is that a crime? Of course, it wasn't. But it didn't feel like the whole truth either. Then there were the company events. Graham was always there, always monopolizing Lydia's time. At the last fundraiser, he practically ignored everyone else in the room just to talk to her. Watching them together made my skin crawl, but Lydia dismissed my concerns as jealousy. "You're imagining things," she said, her tone laced with irritation. "He's my boss. What do you expect me to do, ignore him?" "No," I said quietly. "I just don't like the way he looks at you." Her laugh was sharp, almost bitter. "You're overreacting. He's harmless." Harmless. The word echoed in my mind long after she said it. Lydia wasn't a fool. She was the smartest person I knew. She had to see what I saw, or worse, what I couldn't see. But life went on, and I told myself that I was being paranoid. We'd been through so much together, and she'd never given me a reason to doubt her loyalty. Surely, after 25 years, she wouldn't throw it all away. Would she? That's the thing about trust, you don't realize how fragile it is until it starts to crack. And at the time, I didn't know it yet, but those cracks were already spreading, unseen beneath the surface. All it would take was one sharp blow to shatter everything. Suspicion is a parasite. Once it takes root, it feeds on every little thing, growing stronger until it consumes you. As the months rolled on, my unease about Lydia and Graham became impossible to ignore. I tried to shake it off, tell myself it was just a midlife crisis, that the changes in her were normal. But the signs were there, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Lydia was spending more and more time at the office, or so she said. There were working dinners, client meetings, and last-minute team-building retreats. Each time, she had a plausible explanation, delivered with a casualness that felt rehearsed. She would kiss me goodbye, her perfume lingering in the air like a ghost, and then disappear into her world, a world I wasn't a part of. One Saturday morning, I decided to surprise her. She'd left early for what she claimed was a team workshop at the office. I thought I'd drop by with coffee and bagels, something thoughtful to remind her that I cared, that I was here. I wanted to believe we were just in a rough patch, that a small gesture could bridge the growing distance between us. When I arrived at her office building, I parked and walked inside, balancing the coffees in one hand and the bag of bagels in the other. The lobby was eerily quiet, the kind of stillness that felt unnatural. I rode the elevator to the floor she worked on, my mind running through possible scenarios. Maybe she was in a meeting, or on a call, or maybe I was about to feel like an idiot for being too paranoid. But when I stepped onto her floor, the lights were off. The desks were empty. There was no workshop, no team-building exercise. My footsteps echoed in the quiet as I approached her office door, peering through the glass window. It was locked, her desk untouched. I stood there for a moment, feeling foolish, before heading back to the car. Maybe she was at a client's office, I told myself. Maybe I'd misunderstood. But the coffee in my hand had gone cold by the time I got home, and so had my confidence in her story. The excuses started piling up after that. Lydia became more evasive, and the warmth that had once defined our relationship felt more like a flicker than a flame. She started coming home late, slipping into bed without a word. I would lie there in the dark, listening to her breathing, trying to convince myself that this was just a phase. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I began paying closer attention to her behavior. She had become more protective of her phone, always keeping it close. When a message came through, she'd glance at it and quickly lock the screen. When I asked her about her day, her answers were vague and rushed, as though she was trying to distract me. Once, I saw her texting in the kitchen and caught the faintest smile on her lips, a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. Then there were the unexplained expenses. Lydia handled most of our finances, she'd always been better with numbers than I was. But when I glanced at our joint account one afternoon, I noticed charges I couldn't explain: luxury hotels, high-end restaurants, boutique shopping trips. When I brought it up, she waved it off. "Work stuff," she said dismissively, her tone clipped. Graham likes to take care of the team. It's all reimbursed. Are you sure? I pressed, pointing at one of the charges. This doesn't look like a client dinner. She barely glanced at the statement. It's fine. You're worrying about nothing. But I wasn't so sure anymore. My suspicions hit their peak when I stumbled upon something I wasn't supposed to see. Lydia had left her laptop open on the dining room table one evening. She was in the shower, and I was clearing up after dinner when I noticed the screen. It was an email chain between her and Graham. Most of it was work-related, but one line stood out like a neon sign in the dark. Looking forward to tonight. Can't stop thinking about last time. My chest tightened, and I felt a sick, sinking feeling in my stomach. I clicked out of the email before Lydia could catch me, but the words burned in my mind. That night, as she climbed into bed beside me, I couldn't even look at her. I needed to know the truth, but I couldn't confront her, not yet. If there was something going on, she would deny it, twist it, make me feel like I was overreacting. No, I needed more than a gut feeling or a suspicious email. I needed proof. The next day, I contacted a private investigator. His name was Mark, and he came highly recommended, a no-nonsense type who specialized in uncovering the kind of truths people didn't want to face. When I explained the situation, he nodded with a look that told me this wasn't his first rodeo. Give me a week, he said. I'll find out if there's anything to worry about. I handed him all the details, her schedule, Graham's information, the names of hotels and restaurants I'd noticed on the statements. As I left his office, I felt a mix of dread and determination. If Lydia was hiding something, I was going to find it. For now, I had to act normal. Pretend I wasn't unraveling inside. Pretend I didn't notice how her touch had grown colder, how her smiles no longer reached her eyes, how the woman I had loved for a quarter of a century seemed to be slipping away from me. Suspicion is a parasite. And mine was growing stronger by the day. The days leading up to Lydia's weekend trip unfolded in a tense, unsettling rhythm. Each moment with her felt like a performance, a carefully orchestrated routine designed to maintain appearances. She moved through the house with a deliberate lightness, humming as she folded laundry or prepared her meals. Her focus, however, seemed elsewhere. There was a distance in her eyes, a layer of detachment that no amount of pretending could disguise. I watched her closely, taking in the subtle changes. She was dressing differently, sharper, sleeker, more deliberate in her choices. Her makeup was more polished, her hair styled with a precision that felt less like an afterthought and more like preparation. There was an energy about her, an anticipation that she couldn't quite contain. It wasn't the nervous energy of someone about to face a demanding work project. It was something else entirely. At night, she slipped into bed with the casual grace of someone who had nothing to hide. She read her book, her face serene, as though the weight of the world rested solely on me. I lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. But every detail added to the growing weight in my chest, the late nights, the guarded phone, the unexplained expenses. It all pointed in one direction, and the clarity of it was suffocating. The private investigator's updates came sporadically throughout the week, each one a small knife in my side. She was seen at a boutique hotel during a lunch break, her movements tracked with the precision of someone unguarded. Graham, too, was nearby, his appearance coinciding just enough to stoke my fears. Mark was meticulous in his observations, noting details without offering conclusions, leaving me to connect the dots myself. The weekend arrived, and with it, the trip Lydia had casually mentioned earlier in the week. She packed quickly, efficiently, the contents of her suitcase folded with the care of someone who was used to traveling light. Watching her, I couldn't help but notice how different she seemed, focused, energized, almost happy. It was the kind of happiness I hadn't seen from her in years, and it twisted something deep in my chest. When she left, the house fell silent. The emptiness was a stark contrast to the hum of her presence. I walked through the rooms aimlessly, my thoughts a whirlwind of anger, doubt, and resignation. I wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation for everything, that I'd been wrong to suspect her, wrong to bring in an investigator, wrong to let suspicion consume me. But I knew better. The truth was circling closer, and denial could no longer protect me from it. Mark called the next morning, his voice steady but carrying a weight that mirrored my own. Lydia had checked into the resort as expected, her room booked under the guise of work. Graham had arrived not long after, his presence noted but not overtly connected to hers. By evening, they were seen together in the hotel restaurant, their conversation animated, their proximity too intimate to be casual. The photos arrived soon after. Seeing them hit harder than I'd anticipated. Lydia's smile was effortless, her posture relaxed. Graham leaned in close, his hand resting on the back of her chair, his expression a mix of charm and triumph. They looked comfortable together, like two people sharing a secret. It wasn't definitive proof, but it was enough to send my thoughts spiraling. That night, I barely slept. My mind churned through every possible scenario, each more damning than the last. I thought about the life we had built, the years of trust and love, the quiet moments that had once been the foundation of our marriage. It all felt fragile now, like a house of cards trembling under the weight of a single, devastating truth. The following day brought more updates. Room service for two delivered to Graham's suite, their movements confined to the privacy of the room. Mark was methodical in his observations, his report clinical but thorough. I appreciated his discretion, but each detail felt like a fresh wound. The distance between suspicion and confirmation was narrowing, and I was bracing myself for the inevitable collapse. When Lydia returned home Sunday evening, she carried herself with an air of accomplishment. She unpacked her suitcase with the same efficiency she'd packed it, her demeanor as light and casual as ever. Watching her, I felt a strange mix of anger and sadness. She moved through the motions as though nothing had changed, but for me, everything was different. That night, lying beside her, I couldn't close my eyes. The quiet of the house pressed down on me, heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. Lydia's breathing was steady, her face peaceful in sleep. I stared at the ceiling, knowing that the truth was closer than ever. Soon, there would be no denying it. The truth hit me like a cold wind, sharp and unrelenting. Mark's final report arrived on a quiet Monday afternoon, his voice steady as he detailed everything he'd uncovered. But it wasn't just the photos or the video that left me reeling, it was the revelation of how calculated, how transactional, Lydia's betrayal had been. Graham hadn't just seduced her. He had bought her. The offer had come weeks before, a calculated proposal delivered under the guise of opportunity. In a string of messages recovered by Mark, Graham had laid it out plainly, $100,000 for a single night with Lydia. It wasn't love. It wasn't even lust. It was a business transaction, a deal meant to satisfy his ego and his desires. And she had agreed. The messages were explicit, yet detached in their tone, as though they were negotiating a contract rather than discussing an affair. Lydia had asked questions, clarified terms, even hesitated briefly. But in the end, she had said yes. "I'll wire the money after the weekend." The final message burned in my mind, its cold precision a stark contrast to the warmth I had once believed defined our marriage. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a spontaneous mistake. This was a deliberate choice, one that reduced 25 years of partnership to a number on a balance sheet. Mark's voice on the call was measured, professional, but the weight of his words was suffocating. He described the weekend in meticulous detail, the dinner at the hotel, the drinks at the bar, and finally, the hours they spent behind closed doors in Graham's suite. The video footage he captured wasn't graphic, but it didn't need to be. It showed enough, Lydia leaning into Graham, laughing at something he whispered, her body language relaxed and familiar. And then the door to his room closing behind them. It wasn't just betrayal, it was betrayal for a price. I hung up the phone and sat in silence, the weight of the revelation pressing down on me. For years, I had worked to provide for Lydia, to give her the life she dreamed of. I had thought we were a team, partners in every sense of the word. But now, I saw the cracks that had always been there, hairline fractures I had ignored for the sake of keeping our life together intact. The rest of the day passed in a haze. When Lydia came home that evening, she moved through the house with an air of casual confidence, completely unaware that her secret had been exposed. She smiled at me, asked me about my day, and poured herself a glass of wine as though nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong. I couldn't look at her without seeing the messages, the photos, the video. Without hearing the echo of that $100,000 offer in my mind. I kept my composure, responding to her questions with vague, detached answers, all while my mind raced with plans for what came next. That night, after she had gone to bed, I opened my laptop and reviewed the evidence again. Each photo, each line of text was a dagger, cutting deeper into the wound her betrayal had left. But it was the simplicity of it all that struck me the hardest. Graham hadn't needed charm or persuasion. He had offered her a price, and she had accepted. This wasn't the woman I thought I had married. The next morning, I met with my lawyer. I showed her everything, Mark's report, the messages, the photos. Her reaction was measured, professional, but I could see the flicker of surprise in her eyes. "We'll move quickly," she said, her tone firm. "This is more than enough." The divorce papers were drawn up that same day. There was no point in waiting, no point in giving Lydia a chance to spin her web of lies. I wanted her out of my life, and I wanted it done swiftly. When I returned home, Lydia was in the living room, scrolling through her phone. She looked up at me with a smile, but it faded when she saw my expression. I set the papers on the coffee table, the weight of them heavy in the silence that followed. Her confusion turned to panic as she read the first few lines. She looked up at me, her face pale, her hands trembling. "I know," I said, my voice cold and steady. "About Graham. About the money. About everything." The color drained from her face as the reality of what I was saying sank in. She stammered, tried to explain, but I cut her off. There was nothing she could say that would undo what she had done. As I walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the weight of her choices, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. The truth, as devastating as it was, had set me free. But Graham wasn't free. Not yet. The divorce moved quickly, faster than I anticipated. Lydia fought it at first, sobbing and begging for a chance to explain, to repair what she had broken. But the evidence was insurmountable, and her pleas carried no weight against the cold, hard truth. My lawyer made sure everything was handled with precision, leaving Lydia with as little leverage as possible. She left the house soon after, taking her belongings and the hollow remnants of our marriage with her. But for me, the end of the divorce was not the end of the story. Not yet. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Graham's smug face in those photos and videos. He wasn't just a man who had crossed a line, he was a predator, someone who had used his wealth and influence to manipulate Lydia into betraying me. I couldn't let that stand. I wasn't the kind of man to let someone walk away unscathed after ripping apart my life. I needed to make him pay. It started with a plan, something methodical and deliberate. I knew where Graham worked, the restaurants he frequented, even the routes he took to and from his sprawling estate. It didn't take long to find a few guys willing to help me for the right price. They weren't professionals, just men who understood how to send a message. I met them in a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town, far enough from prying eyes. They listened as I laid out the details, their expressions impassive. They didn't ask why, and I didn't volunteer an explanation. All they needed to know was where and when. The night of the plan was cold, the air sharp and biting. Graham had a routine, he always stopped at the same upscale lounge after work, sipping on overpriced whiskey before heading home. My guys waited for him in the parking lot, their faces obscured by hooded jackets and caps. I didn't join them, I wasn't stupid enough to get directly involved. But I watched from a distance, parked in a dark corner of the lot, as they carried out the job. Graham emerged from the lounge, his gait slow and confident, his phone in one hand and his keys in the other. He didn't notice the men until it was too late. They moved quickly, one grabbing him by the collar while another landed a punch that sent him sprawling. It wasn't elegant or theatrical, it was brutal and efficient. Fists and boots met flesh and bone, leaving Graham crumpled on the pavement, his cries muffled by the cold night air. It was over in minutes. They left him there, battered and humiliated, but alive. That was important. This wasn't about murder or irreversible damage, it was about taking something from him, just as he had taken something from me. When I drove past him on my way out of the lot, I barely recognized him. His face was swollen, one eye shut completely, and blood smeared across his tailored suit. For a moment, our eyes met through the cracked lens of his glasses. There was no recognition, just a flash of panic and confusion. I kept driving, my heart pounding, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The following morning, the story was all over the local news. Prominent businessman attacked outside lounge, the headlines read. The reporters speculated about a mugging or a random act of violence, but no one seemed to suspect anything deeper. Graham himself stayed silent, likely too ashamed to admit that someone had orchestrated this act of vengeance. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't joy, not exactly, it was a quiet satisfaction, a weight lifted from my chest. Graham had learned that actions have consequences, that some lines can't be crossed without repercussions. As for Lydia, I didn't hear from her again after the divorce was finalized. She had moved out of town, as far as I knew, likely seeking a fresh start somewhere her name wasn't tainted by scandal. I didn't miss her. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by someone I no longer recognized. Life moved forward, slowly but surely. The house felt emptier, quieter, but it also felt like mine for the first time in years. I spent my days working, my evenings rediscovering old hobbies, and my nights sleeping more soundly than I thought possible. Revenge hadn't undone the betrayal, but it had given me closure. It was a final chapter, a way to reclaim some of the power I had lost. And in that, I found a semblance of peace, a chance to rebuild, one brick at a time.